Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm bringing you some fiction recommendations which have nature really at the heart of them that could all definitely work for the upcoming readathon, SpringAThon that I'm hosting. I'll link the announcement video to SpringAThon down below as well as all the important links and information if you would like to find out more. It is a non-fiction focused readathon, but if you do want to read any fiction for it, you can, so long as at least one of your books is non-fiction. So these might be some nice ones to mix in. And on Instagram, one of the challenges is a fact-fiction combination. So if you do have some fun non-fiction on your shelf about particular types of nature, these could be ones that fit nicely with that. So the first two books I'm going to talk about are focused on bees. The first one of those is Laline Pull's The Bees, which is very aptly named. This is a fiction story that literally tells the story of a bee. Her name is Flora717 and she is part of a hive, and we follow with her journey going through the various stages that a bee goes through. The coolest thing about this book is it's entirely biologically accurate, so everything that Laline describes Flora going through are things that bees do genuinely do, but she's obviously dramatised them for the sake of this fiction book. Absolutely riveting. I was so invested on like all of her pollen trips out, the fights that she has with wasps, the interactions that she has with the male bees. It just generally was very cool. If you are curious about bees and want something a little bit more light-hearted than some of the non-fiction out there, this is definitely one for you. One that again is still about bees is The History of Bees by Maja. Lunde. This is a post-apocalyptic fiction which is looking at what happens if all the bees were to die out. But what it's doing is it's following three distinct timelines. One's historical and it's looking at the creation of a new kind of beehive. One is roughly set in contemporary and it's about the bees all suddenly dying and disappearing because of a horrendous disease. And then one is set in the future based on what happens because these bees have disappeared, and it's about the timelines interweaving. In terms of plot, I didn't think this one did a crazy amount because actually the three different timelines, because we were following both of them so close, all three of them so closely, there wasn't really space to do any of them justice. However, in terms of just general information about beekeeping and how important they are in our ecosystem, I thought it was really interesting, and I did really enjoy all the characters. There wasn't a particular thread that I enjoyed more or less, but it was definitely very interesting, and again a perfect read if you are interested in bees and insects but don't really want to go for non-fiction. The next few books I have to talk about are about animals in general, and one of those is 15 Dogs by Alexis. This is a quirky, strange little novel, quite short, and it is told from the point of view of 15 dogs. And basically two Greek gods are having a discussion about which is the happiest, I believe, animal on the planet, and the argument is that consciousness doesn't give you happiness. And so to test this they give 15 dogs who are in the local area human level consciousness, and it's about their experiences. What's really interesting about it is it's like getting into the mindset of the dog and what they like, the combinations of like dog instinct combined with sort of human rationality and self-awareness of those instincts. It was really strange and surreal and had some really fun bits in it. It's very difficult to talk about because it is so weird, but I had a good time with it, and I think if you are interested in animals, this is a weird, fun new perspective on them that you potentially hadn't thought about. An absolute classic that has some really wonderful vivid descriptions of various different animals and their biology is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. It's well known on this channel that I am an absolute huge fan of H.G. Wells, especially when he goes down his biological route rather than his technology based stuff. I think he's amazing at describing really gruesome like grotesque biological things, and also coming up with really cool ideas of how they get spliced together. The Island of Dr. Moreau is about a gentleman who gets shipwrecked on an island and finds that there are all these crazy experiments being conducted by Dr. Moreau which involves splicing animal parts and human parts together to make grotesque hybrids. Really good fun, quite short, totally worth reading. If you want a more modern take on the Island of Dr. Moreau, you definitely have to check out Rotherweird by Caldecott. This is historical fiction but was written recently and is about a gentleman who goes to the village of Rotherweird that has had some kind of strange experiments potentially linked with the army for it, and it's about him trying to integrate himself into this very close-knit community of the village and then finding out their secrets. I said that it was linked to the Island of Dr. Moreau. There are some freaky animal experiments in there. I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil anything, but this was so much fun and very immersive. Really the kind of book that, like, you know, doesn't want to let you go. Definitely, even though it's a chunker, you're going to read it really quickly. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a few books that have got plants really at the centre of their storylines, and one of those series is the Bedlam Stacks by Natasha Pulley. Stunning cover. I'm going to hopefully not blind you with this gold bling that's going on here. This is a historical fiction, and it's about a horticulturalist who goes to pursue Peru in the search of quinine, which I believe is a treatment to, I can't remember exactly what illness, but it's a particular treatment that they're looking for an illness that is running rampant from the time period. There's something a little bit supernatural going on. There's a little bit of magical realism at the end, but there's some real lovely descriptions of plants, and because the quinine is part of, I think, the bark of some of the trees that they're looking for, it is really an exploration of the plants and how important they are to the local community. And obviously it could fit quite nicely with travel as well. I don't actually have any books particularly for travel or water on this list. They're very much for plant and animal. I don't even have any bird ones, sorry. Plant and animal is pretty much all the recommendations I've got for you, but this one definitely could work for travel because it is a British gentleman travelling to Peru. Okay, another one that is an absolute British classic is The Secret Garden by Frances Burnett, I believe. She is a wonderful writer, and this is a children's classic that wouldn't take you very long, but it's totally worth reading. This was one of my all-time favourites as a kid, and is about a young girl who is very precocious and ends up moving in with her uncle, who is very distant, who lives in a big manor house, and it's about how lonely she feels, and she ends up finding solace in a secret garden that she discovers out in the big gardens of the house. It's a walled off section that she finds the key for, and then it's about her interactions with the household and how this garden can end up really kind of warming her heart and opening her up to more people, and the way that it interacts the different relationships within the house. It's so beautiful and lovely, and it's got some really wonderful discussions about the importance of nature and plants in our life, and it's got some really fun discussions about trying to kind of reconnect with nature. So really pretty, very heartwarming. The last one for plants I want to talk about is The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, who I think was by Lisa C. I'm sorry, I didn't write it down in front of me, I'll put it here. But basically this is a historical-ish fiction that is looking at this young girl who lives in the mountains in China where they grow a particular kind of tea, and it's about her experience working with that tea and then also trying to take on her own business, and it kind of continues with her, and then there's kind of a multi-generational thing going on that I don't want to talk too much about in case I spoil anything. Tea really is at the heart of this story, and there are lots of descriptions of the plants and how they grow them and what they do with them, and as far as I'm aware it is based on relatively historically accurate information. Big warning though, there is a fairly gruesome scene super early on involving some newborn babies. It happens very quickly, and then there's nothing really like it again for the rest of the book, but just as a heads up, that happens in the first chapter. It's very alarming, it comes out of nowhere, and then you move on and everything's fine. But just word of warning if you are someone who is feeling a little bit more fragile right now and doesn't want intense scenes, shall we say. Okay, one that I would want to recommend just based on like sheer setting and how important nature is to the general setting of it is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine, Arden. Obviously you could have it for bird and animal because it has them in the title. That's completely fine as well. This is a historical fiction set in Russia. I believe it's in medieval Russia, and it is following a young girl called Vasya who has the ability to see demons from the folklore of Russia, and it's about the clash between the old religions of Russia focusing on folklore and demonology, and that clashing with some of the new Christian beliefs that are coming through. It's also about Vasya's dad's struggles trying to marry her off and how she is a wild child. There's some really fun stuff to do with folklore in there, and she clashes with the Winter King and the Winter King's evil brother. It's really complicated, really good fun, very immersive, but the woods and the forests of Russia really are the important setting, and it has some wonderful descriptions of it, and I think that that really is key to creating the atmosphere in this book. The final one I want to talk about is not really technically an like nature inspired book because it is a fantasy, but I think if you are on the fence about the idea of nature writing and want something maybe a bit different in there, then I would recommend A Natural History of Dragons by Brennan. This is the first book of a series which is the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. And the idea of this is, it is a fantasy because obviously dragons don't exist in the real world, but the idea is that this is trying to simulate the idea of them being real as much as possible. So it's almost like a parallel universe where there are, whilst all the names are changed, there are kind of parallels between different countries, and this is about Lady Trent going out and exploring. And I always describe this like if David Attenborough were a Victorian lady in a world where dragons existed. And her real interest and intrigue in nature and the biological processes of the dragons, and kind of her interest in science in general, general means that this really does read very, very closely to non-fiction and more like a genuine memoir of a naturist than it really does of like a fantasy book. There's no big dramatic fights with dragons, you're not getting that classic political intrigue from high fantasy. It really is a quiet, lovely little series that I would definitely recommend, because if you're trying to look for that kind of like nature memoir style of writing, but you don't necessarily want something that is strictly kind of contemporary in our world, this could be a really fun different one for you. Also, if you're someone who is really big into nature writing and is looking at fantasy being like, that is not my jam, I think this one might surprise you and could be really good fun on your list. So there you have it. Those are my recommendations for fiction books that would fit really nicely with the SpringAthon prompt. Obviously, I think all these books are really good and interesting to read anyway, regardless of whether they fit in with the upcoming readathon or not. Are you taking part? Are any of these going to make it onto your TBR? Do you have any recommendations for fiction books for me that could work for my TBR? Currently, I think the only fiction book I'm planning on reading is Earthsea for it, and I'm not even too sure if I'm definitely going to pick that up yet or not. My TBR will be out hopefully in a couple of days. So yeah, I hope you're all having a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!